all the professional politicians who have exploited the undercurrent of Islamophobia running through this country, Newt Gingerich has set himself apart. First, the former Republican House Speaker called Muslims attempting to exercise their First Amendment rights radical Islamists. Then he compared them to Nazis. And in our fourth story, the conservative icon has now taken his demagoguery to a different level by calling on the federal government to seize control over Lower Manhattan in New York. The website Talking Points memo linking to an interview Gingerich recorded Thursday on Wall Builders Live, an internet radio show hosted by Glenn Beck's favorite fake history professor, David Barton. During the interview, Mr. Gingerich called the U.S. the central front in the war with radical Islamists and declared his belief in the First Amendment to the Constitution.
In terms of religious liberty, I'm prepared to defend any group's right to worship without the government stopping them.
However, Gingerich went on to define the proposed Islamic Center on Park Place as a political effort and not religious. He then outlined how multiple levels of government could go about removing a group's right to worship. First, he says, New York's Mayor Bloomberg should reconsider his support for Park 51. Gingerich suggested intervention by the New York Attorney General Andrew Cuomo, who could, quote, slow the project down for decades. Finally, Mr. Gingerich, the totalitarian former member of Congress, suggested that Congress itself and the president federalize part of New York City to stop the Islamic Center from being built.
I think the Congress has the ability to declare the area a national battlefield memorial, because I think we should think of the World Trade Center as a battlefield site. This is a war.
The parameters of Gingerich's area are unclear. Does it include the 35-year-old double-deck Burger King a block away on Broadway, the strip club 2 blocks away on Murray Street, or would it be the larger mosque exclusion zone that Gingerich outlined on Fox News in July?
I'm quite happy if they'd come in and said we want to build a community center near Central Park. We'd like to build a community center near Columbia University, but they didn't.
Central Park begins at 59th Street. At this moment, I'm speaking to you from a studio 10 blocks below 59th Street. 59th Street's that way. Am I on a battlefield? We requested clarification from Gingerich's office. They have yet to respond. As for how actual New Yorkers feel about the location of the Park 51 Center, the New York Times today released a poll that suggested a majority think the Islamic Center has a right to go forward, but would prefer that backers voluntarily chose a different location. One New Yorker who supports both the building and the proposed location of Park 51 is Talat Hamdani, a retired middle school teacher who is Muslim and whose son, Mohammed Salman Hamdani, an EMT and police cadet, was lost in the World Trade Center attacks of September 11th, 2001. Thanks for joining us tonight. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me, Keith.
Your son is now recognized by this city, by this country, as a hero. He went into those buildings on 9/11, tried to save lives, but that was not always the way it was, correct?
Sadly, it was not. And there were implications immediately after he disappeared that day that maybe he was linked with the terrorist attacks that day, and there was a flyer circulating the NYPD with a wanted sign, wanted, chemistry major. And New York Post, printed the article, headline, missing or hiding. And it had insinuations that he was seen at the Midtown Tunnel that day at 11 a.m. And, people are very skeptical about who this young man is.
And it was so bad that you had to, or you chose to, when you put up a missing poster, you chose to not give his full name?
Yes, when my brother went to print the flyer, when they saw Muhammad, his office was giving him a difficult time. So he eliminated that, and we put up the flyers with Sal, because that's what his American friends called him. But after a couple of hours, when I went back on the street, all those flyers were pulled down. They were pulled down, and it was a very difficult time, and we did not have time to grieve. We just had to go forward to find him and then, clear his name.
Did you think, in terms of the overall viewpoint and people's reaction to Muslims in this country after 9/11, did you think we were moving, perhaps not as quickly as we could be, but in some positive direction since then, in terms of interfaith understanding and the understanding that faith was the tiniest part to do with this? And did we suddenly go the wrong way, or has it been worse than the rest of us have known?
Initially, for the first few years, there was sympathy, there was, empathy for us. I mean, I did get supportive letters from many people that, we are sorry for whatever some of our countrymen are saying about your son. And now it's very different. 9 years later, it is, there is no sympathy or empathy at all for the Muslim Americans. On the contrary, I'm getting hate mails now really bad hate mails, with my regular mail address, and it seemed they got it from my DMV records.
Oh, man.
And then there were children who changed their names, and they adopted American names, Adam, Mickey, Michael. Now, what's happening is adults are adding a Christian name at their end to be recognized and accepted as Americans. That's so sad.
Did that just happen, or did people make that happen? And I'm thinking of what Mr. Gingerich has now said about turning, I don't know, maybe he means up to Central Park, maybe he means up to Columbia University, should all be under federal control, but he's talking about he's basically talking about an exclusion zone.
Yes, which I don't agree what he's saying, because
Sure.
he has no right to get involved in this issue, because he did not lose anyone over there.
Mm-hmm.
He is not a New Yorker. All these politicians who are just jumping on the bandwagon, ostracizing American, Muslims, like me, other families, ostracizing, painting everybody with a broad brush. We didn't attack this country. We suffered. We gave our lives. Our people are dying on the line. Why are we being held accountable for this action of a foreign terrorist group?
Do you have any concerns about speaking out in favor and with your group, 9/11 Families for Peaceful Tomorrow, about the Park 51 project? Do you worry about that?
I have no worries about it, because I am standing for what is dutifully mine. They are cloaking this issue in a sensitive issue and too close and too soon. It's not that click. To me, it is about my freedom of religion. Mm-hmm. All those people that were murdered that day, they were murdered not for their faith, race, or ethnicity, but for being American and believing in the American values of democracy, freedom, liberty of speech, and to pursue a faith of your own choice. So the best that we can do as a tribute and legacy to them is to uphold those American values, unlike, Newt Gingerich and whoever is jumping on this, like vultures feeding on the bloodshed of 2,700 Americans. Mm-hmm. They can be they are the lowest of mankind.
That's beautifully put. Talat Hamdani of the September 11th Families for Peaceful Tomorrows, thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me.